This is Genuine Connections, featuring collaborative conversations about community, content, creativity, commerce, and the convergence of media and marketing.
Welcome to this episode of Genuine Connections. I am Matt Wurst, the CMO at Genuine, and I'm excited to talk with our guest today because she isn't just talking about innovation, she's leading it. Ruth Yomtoubian is the VP of Global Innovation at VSP Vision, where she's transforming a multi-billion-dollar business really from the inside out. AI strategy, she's building it. Sustainability innovations, she's driving them. Emerging tech, she's already several steps ahead. And Ruth's career has spanned startups, corporate giants, and global consulting. And she's never really stopped exploring the undefined, uncharted, and occasionally uncomfortable spaces where true change happens. She's a genre-defying leader with an engineer's rigor, a storyteller's soul, and a startup spirit. And we'd met a couple of years ago, but I'm excited to dig in with her today because we're going to see what it really takes to spark innovation, to build communities, and stay relentlessly curious in a world that isn't stopping moving anytime soon. So let's get into it and begin our conversation with Ruth Yomtoubian. Hi, Ruth, and welcome to Genuine Connections. We appreciate you being here and making this connection with us. It's nice to see you. Nice to talk with you.
Great to be here. I, by the way, love the name Genuine Connections. It just spoke to me immediately when you invited me to be a part of this conversation.
Well, I was excited to talk with you and make this connection because you are someone who I've met and known and seen at events and speak on panels, but you kind of sit at this really unique intersection of innovation, marketing, technology, personality, and I am excited to get to know you and let our listeners and viewers get to know you as well. So let's start with just who you are, your journey, your background. It goes deep, but it also goes kind of wide, right? Consulting, startups, big tech, global leadership. Is there a through line that has brought you into this more thought leadership, innovative building mindset?
Yeah, yes, definitely. Great question. I think one area I would start with is just on the Genuine Connections theme, just continuing on there, is that I think I take a very grounded approach to innovation. And that's been just a through line through my experience professionally and personally. And I think that's why I kind of burst through the crowd of a lot of what I call faux innovation or hype, is because I really do try and take a genuine and grounded approach to innovation. And part of that is always looking at the past and the current state and having respect for why things are the way they are. And much of that I really attribute to where I grew up. I grew up within an immigrant household in Northern California, where it was a melting pot in the true sense of people from all around the world who moved to Silicon Valley to push forward and to make progress, but also came from various heritages and origins that were newer to the U.S. And
so this is not only in your it's not only in your DNA. It's kind of the nature and nurture that we're both cultivating this within you.
Absolutely. So I had to convince my parents why I needed to go to a sleepover, all the way to studying abroad. And it was, why would you ever do this? So foreign to people who came to this country and who moved to California specifically because this was the Golden State. And then you have people who are very tied to their heritage, who are also involved in progress and technology. And I think sometimes we don't think enough about the role knowing yourself plays in being innovative. People who are out of touch with their own skill sets are oftentimes not very good at understanding where the puck is moving if you don't have awareness of where things are today or where you are today. I like to say that there are a lot of variables in innovation and that even you are one of those variables. So I've always been very aware of heritage and the past, and having respect for the past, I think, makes me an effective innovator and not just an innovator.
Well, that kind of cultural heritage is interesting because again, it's not always about like what you make. It's also about who you are, as you said, right? Think of this as almost like alchemy. We're turning things into other things in
Yes.
this ecosystem, and that influence is just as important. As you've moved throughout your career working at again big companies, even startups from and some of those big companies like AT&T, that when I think of innovation, AT&T
Yes.
is probably at the forefront of that. But as you move into now, you're at VSP. I know what it is. I don't know if every one of our listeners knows what it is, although they probably will once you explain it.
Yeah.
But how has the mission there aligned with your that personal North Star of what you're looking to continue to grow as?
Yeah, I think just to kind of back up on the trajectory a little bit as you were
Yeah.
sharing, I think having that right mix of, I had also worked in DC right after college, gone to business school at Tulane in New Orleans, worked with startups that were part of a rebuilding movement, again, respecting the past to move forward and understand after Katrina, how did the market change? And then how do you rebuild respecting the heritage and the beautiful place that is New Orleans, but also move and modernize within the startup community and rebuild. And then coming into AT&T, I actually started in operations and really understood the DNA of the company, field operations. I had to wear a logo every day and drive a F-150 and get yelled at by customers and technicians and go in people's homes. And so really kind of understood the blood, sweat, and tears and what it feels like to be on the front lines and just essentially the DNA of the company. So when they said we're opening up an innovation center in Silicon Valley, they were looking for people who understood the DNA of the organization, but could also hold a broad view and be adaptable to learning, because the whole idea of an innovation center was relatively new. And there were designers and engineers and people with business backgrounds. But how do you tap into what's happening? Because I think, as I said, at some of the events we've met at, these innovation centers were not there as stopwatches to say, hey, when are we going to be disrupted? Just go sit in Palo Alto and let us know. It was to go in and partner and to say, we're not going to be left out this time. We have a team on the ground that's talking to these VCs, to these founders, and facilitating. So essentially the mandate was, we want AT&T to be a platform for innovation, not even a participant, and definitely not left out. And so this was a big building block in terms of a lot of learnings I had about the importance of thought leadership, but also directional experimentation, not yes or no, but what can we learn and bring back into the business? And then how do we do it in a high caliber way so that others can come along, because they're focused on their dashboards, as I learned being in operations. And so they want everything green. To turn a cell tower down, you have to go red. And that's hard for people. Nobody wants their metrics messed up. So we always keep that in mind, is that I realize as an innovator, I'm asking people to turn their dashboard red for a day or a month. And that's painful, just to make the improvement and to create.
Yeah, the short-term pain for the long-term benefit, right? Yeah.
Exactly, which fits into the innovator's dilemma and all that. So those are some of the learnings in the first wave of innovation. And then I consulted with a number of companies in the second wave of innovation and spent a lot of time with peers, like some of our shared connections and friends. I really got to know people from all points of the spectrum and work side by side with them to say, how do we, from a startup perspective and a corporate perspective, work together to help create really successful innovation programs, because you have to know what you're driving towards. And many of our clients would say things like, I just don't want to get disrupted. Okay, that's not a directional goal. So let's help you figure out why exactly you want to open up an innovation center. Because sometimes there was just our company feels like we have to, but we're not really clear on why. So we would help not only design the purpose, but also help design the mechanisms to support those goals. So when I got the call from VSP, it was in a similar sort of inflection point of we're trying to move from an internal facing R&D and skunk works model to an outside in model. And it was a lot of change management. And now we're in a really strong place.
Well, I would say most people probably don't realize just how massive and multifaceted VSP even is, which makes that type of, I mean, whether you're a platform or whether you're an infrastructure, that type of change with that large of an organization is challenging. Can you give us a sense of the organization and your role now leading this innovation center? Like what are you innovating?
Yes. So it's a very interesting company. And I think many of us go, oh, VSP, that sounds familiar. And there are a lot of great parallels to other companies I've worked with in the sense that they're a brand that you might not interact with except for enrollment and a bill potentially. And there's many layers and stakeholders because it's an employer sponsored benefit. And that's kind of actually what excites me. There are a lot of things that excite me about being a part of a company like VSP and an industry like Vision Care. But one is that we are employers' investment in health, productivity, and wellness of their employees. The future of work is such a fascinating place because we all spend so much time thinking, doing work, but it doesn't get a lot of airtime just in terms of our shared world. And so that benefits component is changing very quickly. There's vision. Well, one of the top benefits is a discretionary benefit. It's not regulated or mandated in the way that other healthcare benefits are. Mm-hmm. And so as that menu of benefits is expanding into stage of life benefits, caretaker benefits, even more hybrid benefits to support people who want to travel or their mental health or training and volunteering, it's becoming more complex, and Vision Care has to kind of stay relevant to the needs in the benefit space. And then you have a network of providers, so a network of practices, owned retail like VisionWorks, and now IMART Express that VSP owns. And then there's a whole supply chain and eyewear component to VSP as well, which if you think about sustainability challenges and different product brands and retailers online. So things like virtual health, but also omnichannel or new kinds of behaviors that both providers need to be in the loop on, as well as VSP. It's quite a complicated area to innovate in.
Well, it sounds like you're constantly exploring, in some ways, defined spaces in a traditionally structured healthcare adjacent business, but also undefined spaces where you need to build this culture that embraces, I'm putting words in your mouth, so tell me if I'm wrong, but like there is some degree of uncertainty and iteration at scale that needs to happen. But the word innovation can mean different things to different people. So I'm like on a day-to-day basis, or maybe you could take a step back, like week to week, month to month, but what does that actually mean? And how do you ensure it's not just this buzzword that people hear and just kind of gloss over?
Yeah. So I think a really important part of this is, again, going back to the mechanisms, is having the right team and mechanisms in place so that we increase our power and our bandwidth and our visibility. And so we have a few mechanisms in place to make sure that we're constantly turning the wheel, both on ingesting the innovation insights in companies and then pushing that back into the organization to bring them along. I think, storytelling is a really important part of innovation. I'm sure we'll talk about AI, but that's
How really can we not? But yes, we'll get to that part of the story. Yeah.
I mean, as innovators, it's not just the area that's interesting, but it's also the tools for us to be more effective storytellers and bring others along. And so things like prototyping is a very important way to not just say we should create a new smart eyewear benefit. Okay, should we? How do we know that's even going to be profitable or interesting, or do consumers want it? And of course, we do behavioral research and look at other indicators in the market, like the startups or big companies in tech that are taking off. But then we also need to prototype and start to get people around a table looking and reacting and giving directional feedback. And so tools like that. We also produce a series of futurist reports that we publish about twice a year, again, to build the story. And so we focus on everything from healthcare deserts to benefits. Our most recent one was on the future of senses. And so we use what we call startup proxy innovation to look at the startup world and the venture world and say, what's getting funded? What kind of runway is being created? What are the partnerships? So that we have a sense of where this is going. These are not just ideas, but these are projections that are supported by market activity.
Or movements as they become removed from idea and inception to actual execution, whether you are at the helm of that or others are in other ways within your space or externally, right, that you're learning from.
Yeah. Can I actually, let me share a really cool example. And I know you're like interested in the kind of like marketing thought leadership. And so we published this Future of Senses report because we just saw a lot of investment going into not just, augmenting our vision through accessibility devices, but also through hearing, which is coming. Audiology has really started coming into the optical space as well. And then because of COVID, you see that around a lot of sensing around taste and smell. There's a lot of new technologies there. There's a lot of investment, especially in the future of the smells. And then I keep hearing about Sensodyne and how they have a new documentary out on Hulu that focuses on those who have sensory challenges and have a really hard time going into spaces like the dentist's office or even the optical offices, because it creates a overstimulating environment. And I haven't watched it yet, but I just think this is the interesting creative ways that something like Senses is really gaining some traction and awareness from the market and can affect just where we're all going. And we talked about that also in Canada with MasterCard too.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think one of the themes that has been persistent throughout when it comes to this type of, whether it's curiosities that we all have, right, that certainly is a constant theme in your work, but content and innovation with content is something that sometimes gets, I don't know, pushed to the back burner or as an afterthought because we think of technology and we think of machines and AI. But you hear and see brands creating original content that might not normally have been known for that. Like Starbucks has its own original content now. Like that is innovative in its own way if it speaks to a consumer. But I'm curious now, like where and what sparks your curiosity at the moment and how you're cultivating that with your teams. Is it content? Is it technology? Is it both? I mean, you're doing these white papers and thought leadership, but where else are you exercising those muscles in your brain? If that's, I don't know if it's anatomically accurate, but.
So I think, in the past year, leaning further into tracking and translating where AI is going for VSP has been a very humbling experience because 10 years ago when I was at AT&T, there was a lot of movement in that space and a lot of investment, but it was very slow and you could certainly catch up pretty quickly. And now it's super fast, super, super complex. And there are so many varying opinions. And it's, even if you get hands-on with the technology, you might not be talking to someone who is. And so we're all sitting at various points in our learning journey and we're sitting in different industries. And I'm just happy that, as I said when we were at South by Southwest, that we're past the is this good or is this bad, and now starting to build some learnings and moving forward. So that's where I've spent a lot of time thinking about how this is it's a horizontal technology. And so there's potential in that, especially for a VSP, because we operate with clients, we operate with providers, we operate with patients who are also consumers and members. Mm-hmm. And so how do we use AI to pull data and information across these various points, not only in the member experience and journey, but across the stakeholders, so that the data that we might be collecting on the client and member side can help the providers provide a better experience, and likewise on the provider side, bring a better experience to the patient.
So there's a lot to unpack here that you just fully squeeze. There's a lot there. So I want to take one quick step back because what you guys are building, there's a centralized AI strategy that has moved into execution in some way, I'm guessing, because I've seen it, you're talking about it. But to move actually ahead when you're defining these things, you also need to have some degree of whether defined objectives or measurement for success. So how do you define success when actually implementing AI across a large, multifaceted organization that has these different constituents and stakeholders?
Yeah, so I think we're kind of just moved past phase zero. It was kind of a long phase zero, but we went and built out a scorecard. We worked directly with the executive team, which was an important step because as we were also talking about South by, so much of this is happening bottoms up, and I think there's a lot coming out now that there's frustration because you have people within an organization starting to use tools. They're not sure if they have the policies in place to support them, so they're kind of hiding it, or it's kind of under the radar. It's
Don't tell anyone that AI wrote your email. Don't tell them, right? Or should you tell them? I don't know. What's acceptable? Who knows, right? Is that what you're saying? Right? There's different degrees of understanding and acceptance as far as what people can and are willing to share.
Exactly. And then you have people getting maybe frustrated because they're not sure of what they can and can't use. And so there's some catching up on the enterprise level that, as we were talking about, needs to happen. And is it an encouragement or is it just an allowance to use AI? And then if you're also just letting this happen in pockets, this is what we were really trying to combat last year. Just happening in pockets could result in an overinvestment in different AI tools and a lack of coordination and prioritization. And so just in the last year, we said, let's at least put together a scorecard and start to prioritize what matters most within our organization. So something like what we're calling provider lift matters. Like, we want to lift up providers in the process of putting AI tools in place and find a way to take kind of a one network of private practices that is a very, very important part of VSP's DNA, and create a cohesive and consistent experience, and also let them benefit from AI tools as well. So we've kind of dug in further there, just as an example, and then we've started testing and building out some of the use cases. And so this was our sort of testing and planning phase, and now we've formally stood up an AI studio. We're going to be announcing more about that soon, but to focus on more of the transformational use cases. So we do have, and we're different from the IT team. We have a technology group that is focused on the inner workings of the business and making sure that we're turning on solutions like GitHub Copilot and Microsoft Copilot and more of the employee tools. And then from a transformational perspective, we're looking at what new products and vehicles do we need to build to ingest tools like AI scribes and practices. How do we make sure that one of the big use cases in our industry is around using AI for early detection of different conditions through the eye. And there are a number of startups out there and big partners as well working on this. And we are aware that will be delivered. Those insights will be delivered to a patient. And so we need to think about how do we do that, because that's a very important AI application that's going to change this industry.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we talk about the automation or independence, right? AI is also about people, right? Whether it's the patients, whether it's your teams, it's the community of partners. For this kind of collaboration between human and machine, you're writing a playbook or however you want, whatever metaphor you want to use, but is it written in a way like in pencil that you are going back and changing things and erasing things and rewriting things very quickly? Or is that period of learning and experimentation and then measurement and optimization, like, it can't be that long because the technology is also changing pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. I definitely pencil. I'll always try and write in pencil, but really well. We produce a lot of assets to make sure that the learnings that come out of our projects or tests or the artifacts can live on, and they're public. So we share them because we want to bring, like I said, all these providers and clients along with us. But certainly in pencil, because it's an iterative process in innovation. And whenever we're not sure how to handle a new undefined space, we have to lean back on our innovation principles. And those are having a bias to action and just testing and learning and doing it directionally. But then also being willing to, okay, we went too far left, let's go right.
Yeah, I mean, there's no mistakes at this point, I don't think. I mean, there are things that you want to avoid, obviously, that you probably know going in. But this is, one of the topics that we've talked about, and I think this narrative has evolved over the last year or two, is the role of AI and the workforce more holistically. And clearly, different industries are going to be impacted differently. Our company has built a fleet of AI agents that can automate and really think independently about and accomplish a number of tasks that people might not want to be doing and can focus elsewhere. But then there are other areas where jobs that existed then may not need to exist now or soon.
Right.
So whether this is good or bad is not the way we should be thinking about it, but kind of how we should be preparing, what skills we need to adapt. But I still think many companies are stuck, or not stuck, but still in that prolonged experimentation, or like, hey, is this a hype cycle question?
Right.
So what do you think it's going to look like when there is this critical threshold that we've achieved when AI becomes embedded into operational DNA? Are we happier? Are we working less? Like what should we be looking for here?
Well, I think
should I get my golf game back in order here?
I think you had a part one to your question where you were talking about really kind of some of the tools. And I think some of the skill sets that are important today. Yeah. And I think that really informs where we're going. And I've been thinking a lot about this as we had the discussion about AI as a benefit and people wanting to work in optimized workplaces. And I also think that one of the, when I think about my team or I think about people I work with, more and more I look for people that know how to wield tools to their benefit. And think about like a number of years ago, it was all not built here. And that was a big thing, was like, if it's not invented here, then we don't want it. And I think we're really past that not invented here stage, but it does creep in. There's still remnants of that not built here that I see with AI. And it's literally like, how are you going to build some of these tools in-house when you have some of the best minds in the world building some of these tools and startups? And I think sometimes we forget that part of working in an organization is putting the right pieces together to support your mission. You don't have to invent it here. You don't have to create it in-house. I think there's a kind of meta parallel to my own reason why I was asked to join VSP, was to move from an internal facing R&D kind of skunk works, let's just brainstorm looking at each other, to outside in. How can we bring an outside in mindset and broad view into this organization? And so I think similarly, we have a lot of remnants of that not built in house. And we have to see that being a part of an organization, other than your core offering, you're hiring teams that can find the proper tools and put them together. So even thinking about your company, Genuine, is how do you understand that your partners are trying to put something together and they might be missing a piece to do that? And it's their job to find companies like yours to help them better put those pieces together. It's not their job to invent a company like yours and a solution like yours. And that's a big change in people's roles.
Yeah, I mean, I think people realize pretty quickly there are things you can build, there are things you can buy, there are things you can borrow. And that was initially like the three options you had. Now there are unique partnerships that can actually evolve out of this ecosystem. And, people got excited about blockchain and the opportunities to connect in new technologies and what that meant. But what that opened up for me was this idea of, redefined roles around what the word partnership even means. So I appreciate that context. One of the things that we should be thinking about, and as we prepare for AGI and ASI and whatever implications come from that, which we don't need to pontificate yet, because I think we still have a few years to prepare for it. But you're starting to hear some of the preparation that is taking place, and or at least the discussions about the preparation about what it could potentially be, like the plan for the plan for the plan.
Yeah.
But you're also spearheading, I think, right, VSP's sustainability efforts and thinking about future implications of lots of things, which I appreciate and commend you for. So how do you think about innovation in that context of long-term impact then on people, on the planet, on the systems we rely on? Like, is it always kind of there, or do you have to remind yourself, like, wait, what could this mean? Like, how do you
Yeah.
perceive that? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that this dovetails to the question that I kind of ignored before is,
I wasn't going to let you skirt out of it. So.
yeah. Where is this all going? Right. And
Yeah.
I think something as I am very, like, just, I realize I'm very in touch with the big picture. I think big and start small. And just not just specifically where I'm at today, but I've been in a lot of situations where people are like, okay, yeah, you can think big and start small, but then they'll try and force me to think small and start small. And there's a real difference there. And I really pay attention to that of when we're saying, no, think small, start small, and try and keep the bigger picture in mind and constantly remind that, like, we're not just building this vehicle because or this prototype for its own sake. There's a bigger picture at play here. So, for example, we have a lot of owned retailers like VisionWorks. If we're going to go test something in there, always try and remind everyone, like, this is not about just this location. This is about a bigger picture at play where we can bring a tool like this to our providers and practices in the network, so that ultimately we are creating a more consistent and cohesive experience for the member and the patients, and then ultimately helping clients better invest in their workforce. And so I always try and kind of keep that bigger picture in mind. And I think, like, something like where this is all going for AI is we talked at South by also about how people want a workplace that is inclusive, where they're trusted, and where they feel united into something bigger. And I do think that AI has the potential to unite people just around a source of truth or information, or even, in a sense, trust, or feel like they're given the trust to go out and do the work better and have the best tools to do so. So there's something there that I think needs to be unlocked further, and that could be really powerful. And we're in that space, like we were talking about, where there's a lot of frustration, and maybe I'm just very hopeful about that. It's a little esoteric and fuzzy, but I can see on the other end of it where people have more space to think and breathe. And right now there's a lot of, like, noise and emails and responses that could be automated, and where we could help people do their job better.
Well, I think that requires a degree of connection, which is, I'm glad we're talking and people are hopefully listening and watching. But that speaks to the broader, I would almost say, mandate that we collectively have, which is to connect and coalesce around our common as well as our uncommon learnings and experiences. And that's, maybe I'm giving it away, but, like, that's what community means to me. I don't know if you use that word, if you think about that word, but in your context, what does community mean to you?
Yeah. Well, I think community is really important, because being an innovator is not for the faint of heart. Like, it really sounds cool, right? Oh, I'm in charge of innovation. Oh, that's cool, right? If you do it wrong, you're probably poking holes and throwing rocks over the fence. And it's already uncomfortable enough to share that, hey, this industry could go left and fall off a cliff, or it could go right.
Uncertainty, risk, yeah, of course.
And there's a bigger, more beautiful, more prosperous mountain, but you just have to jump over a chasm, right? And both sound really bad to people. But I think that having a community of innovators just to bump ideas up against, share, inspire, produce different ways of thinking about things is really important. And I know I myself, I think I'm one of the nicest innovation people out there, but I know that when I walk into a room or I share information, people get really uncomfortable. So I'm constantly thinking about how do I make this more comfortable for people? And even when I try my best at that, it often can still come across like you're being pushy. And I'm like, well, I'm just presenting information. So we try and be really dispassionate sometimes, or really think about how we can be extra mindful and careful about different triggers when we bring information in. But I think it's also important to be able to have a community to turn to and have the big thinking and the real talk about all of this. And I'll just add that from a perspective of like the providers that we work with, where often you hear, oh yeah, providers, they don't want to hear anything about innovation. I've definitely had a number of providers that have come up to me and said, like, keep going, keep sharing your thoughts. Like, it's uncomfortable, but we need to hear this. And your team is getting me thinking about things differently.
I mean, it is meta in a way when you think about the double entendre and metaphor of vision in what you do. I'm sure I'm not the first to have pointed that out. But as you're talking and hearing and seeing and participating in your vision with you is it's really exciting, and it's hard to be dispassionate about it because the way you talk about it is, I mean, it's enthralling. I would just ask as a last question, like, instead of looking too far ahead, next 6 to 12 months, what are you really most excited about, whether it's for VSP or for the broader landscape in which we are both living and building?
Yeah, I think probably just more on just on the AI learnings front. As you said, we're moving from just testing and learning into actual action. And I think, to borrow a Jim Collins, good to great kind of metaphor about if you hold your gunpowder too long and put it in one big cannonball and shoot it out in the wrong direction, it's really you're going to have a mistake there. And I think this industry still suffers from scar tissue around that. And so I think I always take the approach of the small shots with the gunpowder. And I find that sometimes we just we're like, we can't see the whole target. And then we just walk back further and walk back further and walk back further. Yeah. And I think this time, actually, for once, like, I've seen the gunpowder kind of emerge more quickly in this vision care industry. Like, typically they step back and they step back, and then, more irony there for you on the vision part, stepping back. But to see the whole target, right? But even if you see the whole target, you're in the dark. And I have found that many of these private practices have been extremely impressed, have put out some gunpowder, have used AI for creating job descriptions or user manuals, or even the AI scribes, and their willingness and desire to try some of the new tools around early detection is very much there. So I'm very hopeful that this is one time where I've clearly seen some shots taken early and that we can get more out in the market.
Well, I have no doubt it is also the result of your enthusiasm, expertise, experience that all pushes not just those people, but kind of all of us really forward in a way that I continue to be excited about as well. So Ruth, thank you for this just window into your eyesight and vision of where we're headed, but also, where you've been and what you're doing. I think there are a lot of people who are going to learn some really interesting things from this. So thanks again for your time and for making this connection with us.
Yeah, it was fun chatting with you every time we've met, and today as well.